Dear friends, why did badgers dig up and eat the body of a Hafiz Quran girl? Why did Allah's punishment come? After her death, badgers started eating her in the grave. Seeing this painful punishment in the grave, the people present there started screaming and shouting. Dear friends, we request you to stay with us until the end. Friends, the husband of this Hafiz Quran woman says that he was working in Dubai. When his wife called and said that his mother had died, he cried a lot, but his wife told him not to come back. She said that after spending so much money and selling jewelry, she would handle the burial herself. And then she did. 5 years later, when he returned home, his heart was heavy with grief. His mother was not at home, and he cried loudly in her memory. This mansion-like house was built by his wife. As soon as night fell, he suddenly heard crying sounds at night. He got up in shock and walked to the basement of the house. As soon as the door opened, the scene ahead made him scream. When he was working in Dubai, his wife called and said, "Ahmed, your mother has passed away." These were the words that shook the ground beneath his feet. He listened in silence for a few moments in disbelief. Then Cyrus spoke again. "Are you listening? Your mother has passed away." With great difficulty, he said, "How did mother pass away?" "I had spoken to her, and she was perfectly fine." Cyrus replied, "Her breath suddenly stopped at night. I took her to the hospital, but by then, she had passed away. I am going through a great shock myself. Mother passed away right in front of my eyes, and I couldn't do anything. I have told the neighbors that Ahmed is not here. Please help me with the burial as soon as possible." Hearing this, he screamed and said, "I am coming back. Do not bury mother without me. I am her only son. It is my right to bury her with my own hands." But Cyrus said, "Don't say such things. I cannot keep her for so long. She is an old woman. Her body may decay. Even if you come back, the burial will be done by then. You have spent millions to go there, and now it will cost millions to come back. I have sold all my jewelry to send you there. If you come back, everything will be ruined. What will our children eat? Focus on your work and pray for mother's soul. Coming back will not bring mother back, but you will suffer a great loss." Cyrus' words stopped him from coming back. She said that she had arranged everything with the neighbor Rahim. She just asked him to send some money, and he immediately transferred the money to Cyrus' account. After his mother's death, working became difficult for him. His mother's sudden death broke him. He was heartbroken that he was his mother's only son and couldn't even perform her burial or see her for the last time. His heart was crying tears of blood. After returning from work, he went to his room and lay down, and his mother appeared before his eyes. His mother's kind face made him restless. After his father's death, his mother had been both a mother and a father to him. She worked in people's homes from morning till night, and then spent the rest of her time focusing on his studies and home, that he was only 14 years old when his father passed away. From that time, his mother started working in people's homes. He didn't want this and had told his mother many times that he would leave his studies and work in a shop or do any labor. But his mother didn't agree. Her only dream was for him to study well and improve his future. She didn't want to put him in hard labor and take him away from his studies. Even in a state of high fever, she would send him to school with a smile and go to work herself. She never expressed her pain in front of him. But by looking at his mother's face, he could tell that she was sick. His mother worked day and night and got him into college. During college, he again talked about getting a job so that his mother could rest because she was getting sick. But his mother firmly said that he should just study and fulfill her only wish. Her only dream was for her son to be educated and successful and hold a high position. He told his mother that he was young and could work and study at the same time. But his mother said that she wanted him to get good scholarships and pass with high marks. She said that his father always dreamed that their son would be educated and successful. He worked hard and graduated from college with good marks and got a scholarship to university. He completed his engineering and started working at the same time. Gradually, his job improved and he started earning a good salary. The household situation changed and his mother started resting at home. He even hired a servant for his mother. His mother opposed having a servant at home because there were only two of them. But he wanted his mother to have the comfort she deserved after all the hard work she had done. He was happy to see his mother smiling and successful. His mother was a woman who had sacrificed her youth for him. She could have remarried, but she didn't for his sake and raised him alone with hard work. During those days, Syra entered his life. They both worked in the same office. She said that she wanted to see happiness in his life and see his home settled. She quickly arranged a marriage for him, and he and Syra got married. Syra became his wife and entered their home. He felt that everything was complete, but this was his misunderstanding. A few days after the marriage, he and Syra started having arguments. She would fight over small things. When he came back from the office and spent some time with his mother, Syra couldn't tolerate it. When his mother called him and expressed her needs, Syra would start arguing. She always said that his mother didn't let her sit peacefully with him for even a moment, while his mother rarely called him, "Red heart, red heart." I used to sit with my mother because she was alone. She had no one in this world except me. So, my mother needed my presence. She had sacrificed her entire life for me. One day, the argument with Syra became so intense that my mother came into the room. She said, "What's the matter, son? Why are you arguing with your wife?" Hearing this, Syra said, "These are the things you have taught him, which is why he argues with me over everything. You sit with him and fill his ears with these things. That's why all this happens." When I heard this from Syra, I slapped her hard. The way she was talking to my mother was unbearable for me. My mother slapped me hard and said, "How dare you raise your hand on your wife? I didn't raise you like this." It was the first time my mother had slapped me. So, I looked at her and then left the house. I wandered the streets all day that my eyes were filled with tears and my heart was heavy with grief. The words Syra had spoken to my mother echoed in my ears. I was so angry with Syra that I didn't want to go back home, that I returned home at midnight. And as soon as I entered, I saw my mother. She was awake, waiting for me. Seeing me, she called me over and said, "Your wife is still inexperienced. You need to handle things wisely and take care of her." My mother stroked my head and said, "Go and apologize to Syra, no matter what mistake she made, but you shouldn't have raised your hand." I told my mother that she was being disrespectful to her. That my mother said, "It's okay. She is new to our home. She will adjust in a few days." Following my mother's advice, I went to the room and apologized to Saira. She forgave me, and after that day, she never argued with me again. Her behavior completely changed, and my heart was filled with peace. This is what I wanted, for my mother and wife to live happily together in the same house. The next month, I found out that Saira was going to be a mother, and my happiness knew no bounds. But with this news, Saira started putting new pressure on me. She insisted that there was nothing left in this country. She said, if you work abroad and earn more money, we can build a good house, and then you can come back. It's a matter of our children's future. I was surprised because my job here was quite good, but she kept saying that it was impossible to manage with this much money. She said, we need to build a good house and think about our children's future. How will we afford their education with rising costs? Right now, it's just the two of us, but our family will grow and household expenses will increase. I didn't want to live abroad, but one day, she cried and said, you don't want to give me a peaceful life. Otherwise, you would have gone abroad at my request. It's difficult for me to live without you, but this is about our future. Seeing her tears, I melted that I talked to my mother, and her face turned pale. She held my hand and said, these are my old days. I don't know when my eyes will close. I want you to stay with me. This reached Saira's ears. She said to my mother, why are you becoming an obstacle in your son's future? Did you raise him all his life just to remind him of your sacrifices when it's time for him to progress and hold him back? My mother said, if your future is abroad, then go. And then my mother didn't stop me again that I argued with Saira about this, but she remained completely silent. She didn't respond, and I got my visa and passport and left for abroad 2 months later. That my job in Dubai was indeed very good, and the salary was 5 times more than in India. But I was one of those children who would be happy with even dry bread made by their mother's hands. Whenever I called home, I always mentioned to my mother how much I missed her cooking. That my mother missed me a lot. 2. Whenever I called, she would start crying. Gradually, my conversations with my mother became less frequent. Whenever I called, Saira would say that my mother was resting or sleeping. I was surprised that my mother was sleeping so much. One day, I asked Saira, and she said that my mother had aged a lot and was often sick, so she took medicine and slept. She said, when you call, I don't want to disturb her repeatedly. Then one day, I received a call from home saying that I had become a father to a daughter. I was very happy, but it was not possible to return before 5 years. That my wife was very happy that she had saved a lot of money and would soon build a big house, so I wouldn't have to live abroad for much longer. I was also living abroad with this hope that I was very happy, thinking that I would work for 2 more years and then return home. While I was thinking this, Saira called again. She immediately told me the news of my mother's death, and this news was nothing short of a catastrophe for me. That I wanted to carry my mother's coffin, but I was deprived of this duty because I still had 2 years left to return. After my mother's death, I prayed for her every day and asked for her forgiveness for not being with her in her final moments. This grief was eating me up inside. Then, after a year or 2, I left my job and returned to India for good because my wife had built a house. She had bought a plot in a large area and built a house. She had also saved some money so now I wanted to work in India. Anyway, after my mother's death, Saira and my daughter were alone, and I was very worried about them. When I returned, as soon as I stepped inside the house, tears started flowing from my eyes. Today, my mother was not there to wait for me. Today, those eyes were not watching my path. Even though they used to stay awake for me, my heart was filled with such grief that I stood at the door and cried loudly. Seeing my condition, Syra consoled me. She brought me inside and said, "Why are you worried? Everything will be fine. Mother was a good woman. She will be very happy in the hereafter, and one day we will also go to her." Hearing Syra's words gave me some comfort that I told Syra, "I want to go to the old house. I miss my mother a lot." My mother's death had occurred in the old house. After my mother's death, Syra had moved to the new house. Syra said, she said that she had sold the old house. Hearing this, my eyes widened in shock. I angrily said, "What have you done? That was my mother's house. My childhood was spent in that house. Why did you sell it without asking me?" Cyrus said, "I sold the house and didn't tell you because you would have been worried while abroad." I was very angry at Cyrus' actions. But what had already happened that I then told Syra, "Show me my mother's grave. I want to visit her grave." She agreed and took me to the cemetery. Pointing to a grave, she said, "This is your mother's grave." Hearing this, I sat down at the foot of the grave and started crying at my mother's feet, asking for her forgiveness. I felt like the most unfortunate son who couldn't even carry his mother's coffin. When I returned home from the cemetery, my heart was restless with grief. Sophia suggested that I rest for a while. Then I went to my room with my wife. As soon as I woke up in the morning, the scene I saw was enough to shake the ground beneath my feet. My eyes widened in shock. My wife was lying face down on the ground. When I got out of bed and turned her over, I was devastated to see that she had passed away. I quickly put her in the car and took her to the big hospital. There, the doctors checked her and told me that she had a heart attack at night and had died hours ago, that I hadn't even recovered from my mother's grief when another grief struck me. With great effort and strength, I managed to bury my wife. After the burial, I sat by her grave and cried for a long time. I looked at my mother's grave and then at my wife's grave, but suddenly I remembered my child. For her sake, I returned home. That night, I had put my child to sleep with great difficulty. I woke up early in the morning, performed far prayer, and took my daughter to the cemetery. But as soon as I reached my wife's grave, I was shocked to see a large hole in her grave, as if some animal had dug it with its claws. While I was looking at this, suddenly a badger emerged from the grave with blood on its mouth and claws. As soon as it saw me, it ran away. My daughter and I were frightened by this sight. I closed the hole in the grave and started crying, wondering what my wife had done to deserve such a terrible punishment. The next day, I went to the grave again, and the same scene was there. This time, not one, but 4 badgers came out of the grave. I was scared and closed the grave again, thinking that Cyrus' body might have been completely eaten by the badgers. That day, I returned home reciting Astaghfirullah and spent the whole night sleepless with fear. At 2 o'clock in the night, when everything was silent, I suddenly heard sobbing and hiccups from somewhere. Following the sound, I went down to the basement where the sound was coming from. There was a room there. Today, for the first time, I went to that room. As soon as I opened the door, The sight ahead made me scream because my mother was lying in front of me, reduced to skin and bones. She had only a few breaths left. I quickly picked her up and brought her to my room, then took her to the hospital. Why mother stayed in the hospital for a few days and started speaking again. I brought her back home and asked her, "Mother, Syra told me that you had passed away. Who locked you in the basement?" When my mother told me the whole truth, I understood why Allah had sent his punishment on Syra. She was such a cruel woman. Why mother told me, when you slapped her in front of me, she became my enemy. After you left, she committed many atrocities against me. She would give me food only every other day, and when she moved to the new house, she locked me in the basement. She used to say that she would bury me here when I died in agony. But the oppressor doesn't realize that Allah, who is above, sees everything. When he decides to do justice, the oppressor falls into their own trap. She wanted to kill me, but she didn't know that her death would come before mine. I hugged my mother and told her about the punishment Syra had received. I said, "Mother, Allah is just. He avenged the wrongs done to you by sending the badgers as a punishment for Syra." As time passed, my mother fully recovered, and I remarried. My new wife took great care of my mother, my daughter, and me. I thought that Allah had truly blessed me with a righteous wife, that I started living a happy life with my mother. To all the women out there, I request that you never commit such a sin in the fire of revenge that ruins your hereafter. Always be patient in life and leave those who wrong you to Allah. He is the best avenger. Dear friends, if you like this story, please share it with your family, friends, and relatives so that they can also learn a lesson from it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write Allahu Akbar in the comment box. Thank you.